So, good morning, Lou. Welcome to One for the Road, and it's a real pleasure to have you on my show today. How are you doing?
I'm doing really good, actually. I'm feeling a little bit smug because I went out last night and I know that if I'd have been drinking this morning, I would not have been feeling great. And I feel good. So yeah,
I know you
that's
had a bit of a glitzy affair last night. I saw it on your
yeah,
Instagram, and I,
it
I
was
did the same. I went out to London yesterday, and it was the Christmas vibe, and I, like yourself, would have felt absolutely awful. But the fact is, we wouldn't be recording this anyway if we were
no,
back
you
in that
imagine the
place, would
two,
we?
yeah. The two of us hung over. Oh God, it's been a nightmare.
It'd be awful. So I think by now on season 8, everyone knows how this works and life stories. And we had a brief chat before, and I found your story fascinating, and I'm really pleased you agreed to share it with me. Um, so we generally start at the beginning, so you can go back as far as you like, but the stage is yours, and I'm sure we'd all love to hear.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, so I think I'll probably go back to my, I don't know, mid-teens, going into sixth form. We kind of all, we partied, we were living in the countryside, so everyone, it was always like one person's parents would drop us somewhere in the middle of nowhere. We'd all get hammered, and then somebody else's parents would or them would come pick us up at, I don't know, 3 in the morning, whatever it was. Um and it was, I don't know, I remember the very first party we held, and I guess we must have been, I don't know, 15, I don't know, 16 maybe. Um and It was three of us girls who kind of held it in a village hall. And everybody, I think our whole year came, and it was the first opportunity for that people had to drink. I think it was probably for most of them the first time they'd had a drink. And they were just like these bodies lying around, and I was just like, because I was down on the door, so I wasn't really drink. I didn't really had a drink. And I was just wandering around. I was just like, what has happened? Like, people are passed out everywhere. And obviously it was like the first time they'd drunk, and they were drinking, like necking it back from like bottles that they'd stolen from their parents' drinks cabinets. And it was just like, wow, this is, and it really was a turn off for me, actually. And I thought, I don't want to be doing that. But just the way things were, that was life, wasn't it? You just, drink was part of growing up and leaving home, and that's what you did when you weren't working or at uni or whatever. And anyway, so I went off to art school, and yeah, I guess it was the same culture. I got together with this guy, and he would buy these, I don't know if you remember, the Valpolicella used to come in these like gargantuan bottles. So it was like huge. And I think it
Yeah,
was like probably, I don't know, 3 times the size of a normal wine bottle.
yeah.
And we used to drink that. And so I'd gone from just like maybe, drinking a little bit at the weekends. I was always the designated driver when we were at school, so I didn't drink that much. But then kind of at art school, it was just like, it seemed to be quantity over quality. We didn't care what it tasted like. And so it wasn't, and because everyone was doing it, it wasn't something you kind of thought about, other than when you felt really bad the next day. But you just kind of got recovered as quickly as possible, ready to go the next time. And then after art school, I moved up to southwest Scotland, to a small town called Lockerbie. And part of the reason for that was, like, London in the mid 80s, being a young woman was, well, I guess it maybe hasn't changed that much now. But it was really hard. You were vulnerable. And I was living in All Saints Road, which was like the kind of hub, the epicenter of where people bought their drugs. And it was just really, everything felt really edgy, and like you were living on your nerves the whole time. And I got to the point, and I think my brain is kind of hyper sensitive to stuff. And so I just, at the end of art school, which I loved doing that, but it was all the other stuff. And I was just like, okay, I think I just need to get out of London, and I need quiet. And we took a performance up to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and we just decided to stay up there. Some friends of ours had just moved up; they had a little baby, and we just thought, yeah, why not? Let's just move to the middle of nowhere. And so to start, we were renting this little cottage in like this amazing landscape, and Lockerbie was just up the road, and we sort of started making sculptures and doing sculpture commissions, and just kind of living on our wits, and living an artistic life. And kind of in those days, artists mostly lived on the dole, and then they brought in this scheme called the Enterprise Allowance Scheme, which gave you the kind of sense of doing what you do, but as a business. And that was the kind of first time that I began to think of art and business kind of under the same umbrella. And so we started to sort of make work, do commissions, and we bought we'd done a commission which was these giant trolls, which was kind of this kind of phase where all of these like museums suddenly wanted like life-size people and animals and kind of weird sort of fantasy creatures. And so we were carving these trolls and animals and stuff for I think it was some kind of theme park somewhere up in Aberdeen. And this particular commission was for £7,000. And when we came back to Lockerbie, we were driving through and we passed this church, and there was a little sign on the door, and it said church for sale, £7,000. And we were like, oh, we've got that money, we could buy the church, not thinking this church is a listed building. It's got a massive roof. It's got 100-foot spire. We were like, yeah, it's great space. We can live in it. We can make work in it. And so we were still living in the cottage, and had turned it into a sculpture studio. And it was the end of 1988. It was December the 21st. And I remember sitting in the cottage, and we got I was watching telly, just some random program, and I heard this thunderclap, and I was just like, that's weird. It's not raining. And I went and looked out of the window, and it's like there was no lightning or anything. It was just like, oh, maybe I just imagined it. And then my landlady called on the landline. We didn't have mobiles then. And she said, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, what's happened? And she said, you need to go and turn on the news. And so we did. And that was when we found out that Pan Am, well, we didn't know which plane it was, but that a plane had been blown up out of the sky above us. And yeah, all hell rained down. And so we kind of looked out the window, and then we could see like the sky was orange, and the road below us, which was the main road going up into Scotland, was completely solid. There was like no traffic was going anywhere. And then like journalists were sort of running up to our door, even though we were in the middle of nowhere, saying, can we use your landline, because all the landlines were down. And I couldn't get through to my parents. No one could get through to us for ages. And it was chaos and terrifying. And really all that we knew, we could hear the helicopters going overhead, but we were just sitting watching television like the rest of the world. And we just sat up all night waiting to see what what was outside when it went light. And it was, yeah, it was pretty horrendous. We walked into Lockerbie, and there were bits of plane everywhere and carnage, and you just didn't look up into the trees. You just kept walking, and we just had this need to kind of be with other people, and so we went to the local pub, which had opened its doors in the morning, so people could just kind of gather and be together, because it very quickly, it was, all the emergency services had come, but it was too late. There was nothing anyone could do, because everyone on the plane had died, and also 11 people on the ground. And so it was sort of, one of those kind of horrendous, terrible things that happens, and then you sort of slowly begin to kind of move forward again. And what I found was that I don't know, I had this weird thing where, because I hadn't lost anybody, I wasn't injured, I felt that I didn't have a right to feel the trauma of that event. And so I just sort of got on with it, and I guess suppressed it. And it's only, these days that you like when 9/11 happened, and when things have happened in London, like terrible things, and you see how important it is for people to move in and be there with sort of counseling services, and for anybody that has witnessed or experienced an event like that. But then it was, you didn't even really go to therapy, or it just wasn't something that was part of our culture. And I know they did offer counseling services for family members who'd lost people, but anybody else, you just kind of got on with it. And so sort of fast forward to a few years later, and I'd got into TV documentary making, and I was doing directing a series on terminal illness for Channel 4. And as part of that, they realized that it was going to be a pretty traumatic series to make. We were with families as their loved ones were dying, and that was over a period of 3 years. And so they offered us therapy, and what we all found was that it wasn't the experience, the sort of current experience that we were going through that came up. It was baggage from the past. And that was the first kind of inkling I had that perhaps what had happened in Lockerbie had a much more profound effect on me than I'd realized. And so I went through the therapy, and lots of things kind of sort of fell apart in my sort of personal life. And just I even with the therapy, I don't think that I really understood what trauma does to you until, again, another few years later, and I was making a documentary on post-traumatic stress in soldiers, and we'd gone to interview a psychiatrist at the Priory, and he had was pioneering a technique in the UK. It was already being used in the US, called EMDR, and it was a way of helping people to unwind the trauma of well, for these soldiers, the impact of war, and it does it in this way that's it seems similar to hypnotherapy, but it works in a slightly different way. And when he was talking about how PTSD kind of affects the brain, I was like, I think that might be what I've got. And so then I went to go and get help specifically for that. And so I guess by then I was in my late 30s, and I went into a sort of 10-year period of learning about all of this stuff, and just kind of chasing every kind of alternative therapy and just learning everything. And I became a coach, and I was just fascinated by how the mind works and how the brain works, and how mine was, I was, I ate pretty healthily. I exercised. I was doing what I thought I could do under everything that I'd learned. We know much more now than we did then. But I was still struggling. I was still getting really depressed. I was still getting really anxious. Anxiety wasn't anything that anyone talked about then. Again, it was, so you just felt like you were on your own, and it really didn't feel like the therapy had worked that much. Coaching was much more, I felt it was much more powerful for me at that time, because it felt like, okay, so what's happened has happened. I've done as much work I feel that I can about what's happened in the past, but what do I do now moving forward? And so I felt that coaching was a really both helping other people with coaching and having it done myself, because if you're training to be a coach, then you have to have coaching too. And so I felt like, that's okay, so how can I move forward? And I guess the drinking was something that I was still doing, but I was beginning to be more aware of, this doesn't seem like it's really having a great effect on me. And something that I had noticed when, or understood when we were doing the documentary series on terminal illness, was one of the episodes that I was directing was comparing heart disease and cancer and the care that you get. So I was doing a lot of research around cancer and heart disease and what caused it. And I was like, so there's all of this stuff around smoking and heart disease and cancer. Why is no one talking about alcohol? Because all the evidence was showing that actually that was much more greatly implicated in those diseases than even smoking was. And that was probably 20 years ago. And I remember thinking then, I reckon in 10 years' time, everyone is going to come to this realization, and they're going to, do like a massive education program around alcohol. It'll end up being like smoking. There'll be this huge global shift. And just as everyone gave up smoking, like whole countries who kind of were almost defined by smoking, like, I don't know, Italy or Ireland, or, you would go to those countries and everybody smoked. And within a few years, everybody stopped, or most people stopped. And I thought, God, that's a huge thing that education can do. And like really, people standing up to the cigarette industry and tobacco industry. And I reckoned, well, that's what's going to happen with alcohol. Roll on 20 years and,
Well,
most of that hasn't changed.
No, but I think it's a different thing, right? Because if you say to someone you're giving up smoking, they pat you on the back. But if you say that you're not drinking, you get hauled over the coals a lot of the time. And in fact, just before I came into you, someone shared an interview with Alan Carr on James Corden was on there. He was trying to lose a bit of weight and he said he wasn't drinking. And the reaction from Alan was like ridiculous. It's what we all have, like, oh, you're boring. What's the matter with you and stuff? And there's a difference. And that's why we need to keep on banging the drum. And it's a slow process because of the amount of money involved, But I'm interested actually, because when Lockerbie happened, it really shook the world, and I remember it really, really vividly, right? A bit like 9/11, when I was working in London and doing some flooring in some student accommodation. And I remember it was on their telly and I thought they were watching a film. And I actually said, what film's this? And they said, it's live. And it changed the world. And in a way with Lockerbie as well, you're sitting there in your lovely cozy cottage on a spin of a coin, what you thought could have been the thunderclap was the Lockerbie. It was devastating, you know, but to live down the road, did that, like with your drinking, did you use drinking as a coping mechanism after that? Where was you with your drinking? Because we use it as a coping strategy, don't we? Drinking, and how was it after that? Was that supporting you in what you'd experienced?
I think it was just so part and parcel of life, drinking. You know, it wasn't you didn't kind of think about it, so you weren't, so I wasn't ever aware that I was drinking more. You know, we were just drinking a lot. And and I think when it was only when I gave up that I realized what I was masking. And you know, because I was numbing myself, you know, it was like the thing with PTSD is what another psychiatrist said was that it's usually a number of traumas, and it might be kind of little t traumas or big T traumas, but it's usually the kind of a pile up of traumas over years that creates post-traumatic stress disorder. Although I'm sure it can happen in a kind of one massive event too. But I think that, you know, with a kind of series of little traumas and big traumas in my life, I just masked it. And it was a kind of way of numbing, and because it was so part of the culture, I wasn't forced to kind of think, oh, I'm doing something like really naughty here, or I'm doing something really bad, or I'm doing something different. It was just what everyone else was doing. And I wasn't secretly drinking, or I wasn't drinking kind of inordinate amounts of like bottles of whiskey or anything. It was, you know, I guess what they call now, I don't know what, gray area drinking or social drinking. But, you know, when you're drinking, I guess later on, I was probably drinking half a bottle of wine a night. And, you know, when I told people that after I'd given up, some people would go, well, that's not very much.
Yeah.
And other people would go, oh my God, that's so much. No wonder you needed to give up. So, you know, it's all kind of from wherever anyone else is standing, you know, how much you're drinking. But I think that, yes, definitely the mask, it was definitely masking. It was a way of numbing.
I really, really hear you when you say a number of events in your life can build up to something much better, because there can be a running theme, can't there? And I know what my running theme was rejection, because as everyone's heard, my mum upped and went when I was 14, but then I was in a serious relationship and that happened again. I was and then something else. And then you began to create this story in your life of constant rejection. Then what's wrong with me? And then you numb that out. And also alcohol is progressive, isn't it? You drink more and more. And a lot of people I work with, they say, you know, I can drink up to a bottle of wine a night. And I'm like, the doctor, well, okay, is that actually true? Do you ever think I'll have one more out of the second bottle because that one's not quite enough? And quite often they go, yeah, actually. And before long, you're down in two bottles. So it's progressive, you know, and you can fall easily into that trap because of, you know, the tolerance level goes up, and then you've got a real problem. But I do also say that it's not about the quantity, it's about how it makes you feel. You know, I know people who drink 2 glasses with dinner and they feel anxious, they don't sleep properly, they can't be bothered with the kids at bedtime, and you know, so it's not about the amount, it's about how it makes you feel.
Yeah, and I was definitely feeling this for as long as I could think of. I could remember I would wake up with a sense of dread and a sort of slight feeling of guilt around, or I'd be like, oh, how many glasses of wine did I have last night? And even though it wasn't, like huge amounts, it was just like, it just didn't feel right. It didn't sit right with me. And it was definitely having the impact of anxiety. And then kind of as it progressed through my 40s, I was obviously, what I didn't know then, no one talked about it then, was perimenopausal. So its effects were kind of exacerbated by perimenopause, and I started getting like the most horrendous migraines, like for about 8 years, and then I just got to the point where I was like, okay, I really can't do this. I can't be menopausal and be drinking. And thank God for dry January, which I think was probably it's one of its earliest years. And I just woke up on a New Year's Day, 2017, and I just thought, yeah, I'm going to do dry January. And that was it. That once I'm very kind of binary in my thinking, and I was just like, that's it, I'm done. And I did think, well, I'll see how I'm getting on by the end of January, but I'd already kind of made that decision. It was just like I just switched off the button, and that was it. And it was then that and this is something I kind of loathe to talk about this, because I don't want people to kind of think, oh my God, when I give up, it's going to be like this whole kind of well of stuff then pours out. But how long can you mask? If there is stuff, how long can you mask for? And so it was a process of healing, but it was painful because there was nowhere to run. And it was just like all of those feelings that had been numbed for decades, they were there, like right in front of me. And I was like, okay, so I can't numb this anymore. I can't run from it anymore. I just have to go through it. And so I did. And it was really hard, because that was 5.5 years ago. There wasn't this concept of being sober and sobriety as something that was kind of normalized. It was either you're an alcoholic and you go to AA, or you're just a normal drinker. Whereas I knew that this didn't feel right for me. It wasn't making me feel healthy. I was doing all these other healthy things in my life, but I was still drinking. And so I knew that the culprit was that. And so it was kind of a health thing. I could see it in my face. I think I'd been filmed like in the December before I gave up. And I remember looking at the footage and I was just like, oh my God, my face looks so puffy. And I thought, well, kind of let's use vanity to kind of help me, use whatever we can to switch off the alcohol. And so once I'd made that decision, it was like, okay, right, we're going to do this and face whatever comes up. But because it wasn't the world that it is now, with like people like you who've been such champions for people who are wanting to give up drinking and trying to kind of go get themselves across the line, and then have that support in the months and years afterwards, which is so much of it is around kind of emotional support and helping them to sort of look at things in their past that they'd managed to kind of brush under the rug. And so so it was a very different time. It was no one else that I knew was not drinking, so every time I'd go out, it was oh, go on, have one, gonna treat yourself. Or someone would say to me, oh, well, when you start drinking again, let's go out. So you kind of so all of your own thinking of like, oh my God, I'm a shy person, I'm an introverted person. Alcohol had been the thing that had really helped me come out of myself and be some kind of a social being. And suddenly I'd taken that away from myself. So here I was back being my shy introverted self with nowhere to hide, and no one else being sober as well. So excuse me. So it was you know, I felt like I've just got to kind of knuckle down and get through it. But I've just been so thrilled to see how things have changed over the last few years, and people like you and Emily Seifers and Janie Lee Grace and all of this kind of whole landscape of people who are out there supporting one another, and saying, you know, this is something that you can do, and you can kind of get through the things that you used alcohol to mask. You can actually face those things, and then you can build a life that is way more healthy on every level.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is when you said you got up on New Year's Day and you thought that's it, and you just stopped and you're binary in your thinking, right? I think it was Annie Gracie's dad that did that, and they call it spontaneous sobriety, right? Where you just get up and you go, I'm done, that's it. I personally think it happens a lot before that. Like, a lot goes on in your mind, right? It's the questions you ask yourself, the mornings you wake up regretting things, the conversations you whisper in your head, I've got to do something about this, but you're not quite ready. I know this because that's what happened to me, because I got up on January the 7th, 2019, and I was done, right? But then when I explored that, it's actually been going on for months and months and months, where I was sick of it, but I wasn't ready, you know? And this is why it's so important to have these conversations, because if there's one person who hears this podcast and they relate to, I'm sure actually thousands will relate to you, that it will plant the seed in their head. And it might not be today or tomorrow that they stop, but it could be 6 months or a year down the line, because quite often people say to me, I've heard that podcast with Lou Hamilton, it would be, and it changed everything for me, you know. And it's so important to think actually you're not ready yet, but you can explore that idea, you know. And it's when you start to explore, the magic can happen, you know, because your brain's a really, really incredible bit of kit, you know, and it can work when you're not even thinking, you know. And even like now, coming up to the Christmas period, it's people, they're going to be, well, I won't give up. It's Christmas coming up. And oh, yeah, and there's dry Jan. But do you know what I always say to people? If you can entertain the idea of having that period over Christmas without drinking, you've done a massive piece of the journey there, you know. And then you've got dry Jan. I always do a dry Jan Sober Dave campaign. I organise groups of people. I think last year there was 300 people in my groups, and they'll egg each other on. And so you could start January the 1st actually being sober for a few weeks, you know. So it's these conversations that can start a whole new way. And it sounds to me, when you started that in 2017, everything's changed for you.
Yeah. And I think what your point is really important, and I want to kind of to kind of illustrate that, because you're absolutely right. As I said, it was like, it felt really binary, and it was like, okay, now this is the time, this is it, I stopped. But as you say, there had been times in the couple of years prior to that, maybe even longer, where, you know, those thoughts of like, I really shouldn't be drinking, this isn't helping me, this is like not helpful, you know, arguments happen when you're drinking, you know, all of these kind of unhealthy things that happen around drinking. And I had actually done a couple of times when I'd not drunk for a few months. And I think that's really important to talk about, because when people give up and then like something happens and they like say go back to the booze, it's not, you don't have to feel like you're a failure. It's just like, okay, well, that was a trial run. You know, you can do it. You know, you can not drink. So try it again when you're ready again. And so I think that is really important to say that, because it, you know, even though it seems like it was very binary to me, it actually, as you said, was as a result of a few years of exploring and trying in different ways. You know, I tried to drink less. That didn't work for me. I'm not a moderate. I'm an all or nothing person, and so that didn't work for me. So I, you know, I couldn't. There wasn't the phrase mindful drinking then. That wasn't something I could do.
It's an interesting conversation there, because to some people, half a bottle of wine is moderate. To me, like, I could never share a bottle of wine. But as I said at the beginning, it's all relative to the person. We've all got our own relationship with alcohol, and that's so important to, you know, it's our own bespoke relationship. So when I work with people, say you drank one bottle and someone else drank, I don't look at it as the same. I look at it as, you know, how does that make you feel? You know, why do you want to stop? Have you tried before? What's your background? And once you get underneath it all, you can form a profile of someone and realize, actually, for you, half a bottle of wine is too much. Well, it's too much anyway. But it's to, you know, there's this narrative that goes around in society that, you know, that's you're a lightweight and you haven't got a problem, Lou. What are you worried about? You know, because you're not passing out every night on the sofa with catching flies. You know what I mean? And this is why there's so much pressure when we give up, isn't it? It's like when people justify your drinking based on their drinking, they relate it to what they drink, or what others drink, and it's wrong. But did you come up against anything? You know, dry January is a really, really good period of time to actually use that as an excuse when you're going out. But after that, February, March, April, did you come up against any resistance, or was you that strong-minded that you didn't care? How did you deal with that?
I didn't have resistance in myself. There was definitely kind of comments, and, you know, like, it was just like, there was a sense that you're the boring one.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, oh, you're not actually as fun as when you're drinking. And that's a hard thing to take, you know, especially as, you know, I'd used alcohol to be more fun. And so, you know, I was being told the kind of the truth that I had in my mind was, I'm only fun if I have a drink. And so here I am faced with the kind of, oh, boring me. Not laced with alcohol. And then I kind of did a double whammy on myself, because I then I think probably 2 months after giving up the booze, I became vegan. So like I was like totally in the ostracized. And again, back then, you know, being vegan was really hard and considered really weird. So, you know, I'm very grateful that in the last 5 years, so much around alcohol and being vegan, all of that stuff has changed. You know, the world's become much more open to people trying to live in a way that feels good for them. And, you know, when you were saying about the how much alcohol is too much or not enough, and what I knew was that it had a grip on me. And, you know, whether that was 2 glasses or half a bottle or a bottle or whatever the amount is, when you know that it has a grip on you, you know it's not doing you any good.
That's a really brilliant point.
Used.
That's a brilliant point. And this is the whole thing around grey area drinking, right? It's like, can you take or leave your drinking? And when people say, well, yeah, of course I can. And I say, so you could give up today and it wouldn't bother you. Well, I don't know about that. And that's when you know it's got a grip on you because it's present in your life, right? Uh, and for a lot of people, they think about it or that they negotiate that conversation quite often. You know, shall I have a glass of wine tonight? Or I had half a bottle last night. I shouldn't really, but you know what? I've had a bit of good news today, or I've had a crap email from my boss. And that. So you negotiate that and your arm's twisted so easily, honestly. And that's why I say a lot of the time, no drinking in the week is virtually impossible when you've got some kind of reliant relationship on alcohol, because you get to Wednesday and you're already giving yourself a pat on the back. You haven't drunk Monday and Tuesday. So, so
Well,
Wednesday,
the
you're like,
weekend starts Wednesday, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah. And then you have to start all over again on next Monday, and
Yeah.
then it goes round and round and round.
Mm.
But it's also right what you say about nowadays, there's so much more support.
Yeah.
Um, Even when I gave up, it was 4 years ago this January, and there was AA. And do you know what? I'm a lot more open-minded now about it. But and I probably believe that I went to the wrong meetings at the time because it was very judgy. Um, I don't like being told what to do as well, and I felt like that's what was going on there. And so I went down a different route. But there's so much support. You know, like what we do, and listening to podcasts, and a lot of quick lit out there now. Um, I won't plug my book, but I just have. And you've got a book as well, haven't you? We can talk about that in the end. Um, but you know, there's so many sort of sources of support that would serve the person. So, like earlier, you said Emily Cyphers. You know, there's so many different people that you can tune into and go, do you know what? I like the way they talk. That's my
Yeah.
language. It's a love language, isn't it? You know,
Yeah.
and that's what's so brilliant about it. And I think we all try to make it more open and accepted now that actually it's however you want to look at it, lifestyle change or whatever works there as well. For me, I had to give up drinking because I told someone yesterday actually about how much my blood pressure was when I was drinking, and they said, I don't know how you was alive. Just that one thing on top of being on antidepressants, reflux medication, cholesterol medication, you know, all this stuff that I was putting into my body. And now I don't put any of it in there.
Yeah.
And it's not just stopping the drinking, it's the knock-on effect it has for everything else.
Yeah.
Lifestyle changes, like you became vegan and you're more mindful of your diet and your exercise, and you have more energy, so you're more positive. And you know, there's so many benefits other than the labels we think there are, like, oh, well, I could lose weight, or, you know, um, it's just, you know, I don't know a single person that regrets being sober.
That's so true. And
Yeah.
and there are certain things that can really help. So I have kind of painted a slightly sort of negative picture in terms of like having to face your demons when you give up. But you know, there are things that sort of help sort of to go through the transition. Definitely, you know, having support that is now widely available, but also little things like you know, I would keep my ritual. So if you know, I'd always have a glass of wine at 6 o'clock when I started cooking. So I kept my glass and I just put something else in it. So
Yeah.
I mean, in more recent times, kombucha, kombucha didn't exist back then, but you know, I would find something that kind of felt sort of ritualistic. So I still had the glass. I still, if I have a kombucha out when I'm out now, I'll ask for it in a champagne glass because I'm like, why not?
Yeah.
You know, have it kind of give you the feel of like celebration, but it's just a different liquid inside. And you know, like last night we were out, there were 12 of us women entrepreneurs, 3 of us were not drinking. That's a quarter of the group, which is like huge and that's so different from what it would have been 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And and we were, I don't know, we had a pretend gin and tonic, whatever alcohol free gin and tonic, and then we were back on kind of, I don't know, sparkling water in a wine glass. And then the other really great thing that happened as a result of giving up drinking, as well as being able to get on top of my menopausal symptoms and like take a natural approach to that and come through with like really sort of getting on top of all of those symptoms. It's such, and I don't think it's talked about enough, alcohol and menopause. And I think that if you need a reason and you're going through menopause and you want to give up drinking, that is a really, really good reason. And then as a result of that, what happened for me was just I just became so incredibly creative, and it just felt like this creativity was just like pouring out of every orifice. I was writing, I was painting, I was just doing so much creative work. And it just felt like suddenly I got into my flow. And this was at a time where, I was kind of turning 50, my kids were leaving, my granny had died. I was very close to her, so I was grieving. A very kind of difficult, kind of tumultuous time. But what being alcohol free gave me was this sort of sense of freedom and possibility, rather than, oh, my life has kind of ended, as it, everything that I knew it to be was kind of all over, and now I've just got like the next however long ahead of me. Who am I? What am I about? Instead, it felt like, wow, this is brilliant. My kids are flying the nest, and I can fly too. And so it gave me a sense of liberation.
I feel inspired myself by that. And it's true, right? Because people go, oh, it's not about what you're losing, it's about what you're gaining, right? And like for me, everything's changed in my life. My productivity, my clarity, my drive for doing new things, because I look at it like I spend my life with blinkers on, looking at the floor, going, my life is over for decades, and then on January the 7th, I took the blinkers off, looked up and looked around me and thought, God, this is actually amazing. And that's what encouraged me to carry on, that I was seeing the sights of the world, and it is all about what you're gaining. In so many, I could list probably 50 things, like when you wake up in the morning, look in the mirror and you think, oh, I look well rested and I feel positive, and oh, I'm going to do this today, and I feel excited about it, rather than going through the whole morning thinking, how do I apologize to that person I text last night, or how do I make it with my partner that I called them this, or like the whole mental health conversation, the physical health conversation. And it's interesting what you say about education, because I've learned so much about what alcohol does to the body as well. And when I was drinking, I thought, oh, my liver's knackered because I might have backache or something. But now I know so much more about the arteries, even the esophagus and the lungs, how they work with alcohol, and everything is bad. I was at a charity event, right, for cancer a couple of years ago, and there were a lot of celebrities there. And afterward, Beverly Craven was playing live, and it was a lovely event. But afterwards, there was a free bar, right, and everyone was throwing the wine back, and I was standing there. I wasn't being judgmental then, but afterwards, I was like, "This is crazy. This is like being at a lung cancer event, and they're offering free fags at the end."
Yeah, exactly.
It was really eye-opening, actually. So I do believe that education is everything. And there's so much out there. So where are you now? 5 years, well, coming up to 6 actually, aren't you? What are you
Yeah.
up to?
Yeah.
Yeah, see?
Mm.
Where are you with your life now? What are you up to?
Yeah, it's really good. I started my podcast, Brave New Girl, and that came out of a book that I guess really came out of giving up drinking. It's called Brave New Girl: How to Be Fearless, and it was these little drawings of this character who was fearless, and she, if she didn't know how to do something, she'd invent a way. And I thought at the time it was, my kids were going out into the world, maybe this little character was to sort of help them be brave as they went out into the world. But looking back, I think it was also for me.
Yeah.
And then I wrote another coaching book called Fear Less, which again was me that was me going, facing all the things that came up as a result of having nowhere to hide anymore, nothing to numb me. And so that book came out of that. And then I decided to start the podcast because I thought, well, how can I extend this kind of whole idea of Brave New Girl? And I thought, well, let's interview real life Brave New Girls. And using my background as documentary filmmaker, I started the podcast, and that's grown. I've had the most amazing women come on and talk about their lives, about how they've become fearless, how they've overcome adversity, the challenges they've gone through, how they've discovered how to be courageous in their lives. And then I was just like, well, I'm giving a platform to these women's voices, but how can I help people more? And then I thought, okay, so if I created a podcast guest agency, then I can help people get onto other people's podcasts, and I can really champion those people who are, well, in whatever walk of life, they're trying to have a positive impact either on the health of people or on the health of the planet. And so that's how my business was formed. And so, yeah, I guess all of those things came out as a result of me stepping away from something that was holding me back.
Yeah. And when you wrote your book, was that a really cathartic experience for you as well?
Yeah, I think, well, definitely drawing the first book, Brave New Girl, and then writing Fearless, because I think you tend to write what you go through yourself. And so kind of my exploration of fearing less, of learning to fear less. And I'd realized how fearful I had been all my life. And probably that's why I'd used alcohol to cover up the fear. So I think everything comes from your experience, doesn't it? And creativity most certainly does. And so exploring all of those things through words and images, and now through audio, is all part of that process.
Yeah. I mean, when I record these podcasts, as people know, I don't really say a lot. But like my brain's constantly ticking over. And I I learn a lot from these myself. I do admit I've never listened to one of my podcasts, because once it's in the can, I put it out there and I don't know what it is. But anyway, it's so cathartic for me to hear people's stories like yourself. And when you talk about the menopause as well, most of my clients are women of a certain age, in their 40s, and they're going through menopause, and it's a big conversation. We got people like Kate Roham out there that talks a lot about menopause, Davina McCall, all these people now. It's a huge conversation, and it's really important because alcohol and menopause are like chalk and cheese. They don't mix at
They
all.
really don't mix.
No. So if you can address it before the perimenopausal stage, and that, it gives you a massive boost of a chance to deal with it naturally.
Yeah.
Um, Lou, it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. I can tell you're a pro because you've done this podcast brilliantly, and I'm sure that there'll be a lot of people that listen to it and relate to you and get a lot from it. Where can they find you, your book, your podcast? What can they do?
Yep. So you can listen to the podcast, Brave New Girl, anywhere that you listen to podcasts. You can find me on Instagram. Please come and say hello. I'm brave_new girl. And my podcast guest agency is www.bravenewgirlmedia.com. So come and say hi wherever.
Yeah, and I'll put all that in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for joining me today, and congratulations on your nearly 6 years of sobriety as well.
Thank you, Dave. Keep up the great work.
That,
You're doing brilliant things and helping so many people.
thank you so much, Lou. Have a great day.